Are you really a good person
Mhm.
that's been corrupted by a bad system? Or are you really the kind of fallen person that Scripture describes that will corrupt any system you happen to be placed in?
As you mentioned back when you were an atheist and you were asking the question, is Christianity true? And I do
Right.
think that our job is to try to get people back to that question because a lot of times I quote you all the time. I was looking for the quote, but I couldn't pull it up. But I quote you all the time on this when you said, Christianity, I'm a Christian because it's true. It doesn't always
Right.
even feel like it's working, but it's
That's
true. So I
right.
want to live my life in a way that reflects truth. But I've been thinking about this, and I'd love your thoughts on this too. But, people went from asking, "Is it true?" to, "Is it
Mhm.
good?" But I almost wonder if we're in a phase now where people have already decided what they think about that question, and now they're asking, "Does it work?" Because I think
Mm.
that's as I've investigated deconstruction and all of these things, people, have alr they don't think it's good, but they also don't think it works. They think that it makes, this sort of untenable life that you have to the idea of laying your own desires down and seeing yourself as a sinner is so oppressive and so abusive, and you just have to break free from the chains of that sort of mentality
Right.
and find something that actually does work. And I feel like your book kind of shows how it does work. But what are your thoughts on that? Is like, I don't even know if they're asking, is it good? I think
Mhm.
they already think it's not good. Now they're wanting to know
No,
if it could even work at all.
yeah, I think you're right about that. I think first of all, when you say, "Okay, is it true?" That word "true" is becoming a moving target, right? So if truth is simply your lived experience, something you discover in the context of your own life, it's your own perspective on reality. Well, then I could say it's true, and people will hear it as, "Well, it's true for you. It's true to you, but it doesn't work for me. So it's not true to me."
Mm,
And so the question, so that's why I wanted to take an approach that was not doesn't start with scripture. It starts with true crime. It starts with the stuff that you discover. If you work murders, if you work just criminals, and I think that's part of the problem is that most of us don't get a chance to see the textures of society the way the police officers see them, right? Because most of us don't get called, don't spend an entire shift every single day dealing with the dirty stuff that humans do. We just
yeah.
don't. We watch it on TV, and even then, it's limited. I watch a lot of. I was on Dateline so many years that I still watch a lot of Dateline, and I'll tell you that there's those things you don't get to see all of it, as messy as it is. I protected my viewers on Dateline episodes from some of the ugliest stuff that we were seeing because I was actually uncomfortable talking about some of the ugly stuff because it's really too ugly to
Yeah.
describe. So, but you learn certain things about human behavior. Now, would it be interesting to find that these behaviors that you learn by investigating crimes actually contribute? You discover what contributes to flourishing. How do people thrive? Because you're always working cases where just the opposite is occurring. And then if you were to look at the studies, just so if you just leave scripture out of it, I'm just going to look at how people mess up and then what studies say about the opposite attributes that cause people to flourish and look at secular studies. And you're going to discover what quote unquote works from a secular perspective.
Mhm.
Well, it turns out that you will dumb across by accident all of the core principles of the New Testament teaching on how we can thrive as humans because those things are still so yes, I used to always say that I had a life that I thought was working.
Mhm.
I had a good marriage, great job, great kids. Just bought this home that I'm living in now still 30 years later, and I really felt like everything was great. I didn't wasn't trying to fix something that was broken. That's for sure. But I discovered this was true. Well, it turns out that all of those things that I had adopted as ways to live in order to flourish were all entirely biblical principles that I had adopted through the culture, or just through the fact that if you're created in the image of your creator, you are going to dumb into some of these things even without knowing it.
Yeah.
And so that's why I wanted to write a book that just kind of focuses. And here's what I would say too about this idea. The one chapter in this book that I thought was the most interesting was when I discovered this one attribute of human flourishing that leads really to the broadest sense of flourishing. Flourishing in terms of your performance at school, your grades, your understanding of how to discover what's true and what's not true will be improved if you adopt this. Your relationships will be deeper. You'll be a better employer, a better employee. You'll actually make more money. You'll live longer. You'll have better mental health. You'll have better physical health. Pretty much every metric that you can measure of whether humans are doing well will improve if you simply adopt this one thing. And this one thing happens to be humility.
Mhm.
Now, it's been studied for about 35 years, and I've collected all those studies. But it turns out this idea that I should surrender, that I should recognize humbly who I really am, that is oppressive. Well, the truth is, it comes down to, is that who you really are? We got a chapter in the book that just talks about that. Are you really a good person
Mhm.
that's been corrupted by a bad system? Or are you really the kind of fallen person the scripture describes that will corrupt any system you happen to be placed in? Which of
Yeah.
those two things is true? Because if the second thing is true, then the sooner you can come to that conclusion in humility, the more you will thrive. And it turns out there's only one worldview that leverages this core attribute. Because think about it, every other worldview is meritorious,
Yeah.
right? I'm either going to become
Karma.
closer to
Yeah.
God, or or in a secular perspective, I'm going to earn something. Every meritorious worldview develops pride. This is why scripture says the only view of God in which we are given something we are told we cannot earn. Why? It's a free gift so that no one can boast. Oh,
Mm.
it's a pride issue. It's a humility issue. So it turns out that one core attribute that causes humans to thrive at the highest level happens to be represented most fully by a worldview that says, hey, stop first and figure out who you really are. And once you come to the conclusion that you're not all you think you are, you will begin to have the best life you ever imagined. Well, that's something to me that is speaks. I don't know where else you find that. Do you remember
Yeah.
Mike Adams and I were working together doing conferences? He would always laugh about this book that he was writing, like, how to become humble in 10 easy steps and how I made it
Yeah.
8. Right? He used to always, and Frank Turek always mentions that book title too.
I thought that was
And
Frank's joke, so that was Mike
no,
Adams,
that's
huh?
Mike Adams, and I thought that was just so funny, right? And because we know innately you cannot chase humility. You cannot
Yeah.
pursue it because it just leads to pride. Instead, as Spurgeon says, humility is simply the proper assessment of who we are,
Yeah.
and that means you'd have to start by embracing this notion that you're not as great as you think you are. And I know that might sound oppressive, but
Mm.
this idea of are we by our nature sinful is super important. And so we try to describe these with 15 true crime stories that illustrate the point. Then I'm going to back those up with all of the secular studies that make that point. And then I'm going to reveal to you how scripture has been making that point for 2000 years. So it turns out the truth in true crime is really ancient truth,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
you just discover it in a different way when you're working. And that's what I was seeing. Like people would always ask me, well, why is this our guy? Why do you think this is the guy? Well, no one ever asked, like, what did you learn about humans work in this case? That's always to me been the most fascinating part of it, though, is what do you learn working the case?